Well, welcome all to our conversation exploring the work of Fernando Pessoa's Multitude. It is a conversation with a truly gifted instructor of the Graham School, Katia Mitova, and we're very grateful for her longstanding leadership and service to our institution, and so excited about her class this upcoming autumn. I will just share as I welcome that I'm Seth Green. I'm the dean here at the Graham School, and we are thrilled to have you virtually at our beautiful campus. And it is this gorgeous today. It actually is 70s and all sun here in Hyde Park. For those of you who are not familiar, I'll just share that the Graham School is the place for lifelong learning for now more than 130 years. And we have programs across the liberal arts, including a Master of Liberal Arts, a basic program of liberal education for adults, which is where we find extraordinary instructors like Katia. We have open enrollment across all disciplines, and then we have annual programs, and one is running right now at the Fairmont. We have several hundred museum professionals currently congregated to learn more about the future of lifelong learning in that space. But the reason you are here today, and so I'm going to take down my screen so that we can spotlight Katia, is to hear a conversation with Katia Mitova, who has been teaching in the basic program since 1998. She holds an MA in Comparative Slavic Studies from the University of Sofia, Bulgaria, and an MA and PhD from the Committee on Social Thought here at the University of Chicago. In her native city of Sofia, she worked as an assistant professor of Slavic literatures, and she received a number of awards here at the Graham School, including receiving the Excellence in Service and the Excellence in Teaching awards. And so, Katia, it's a pleasure to have you here with us, and we're really excited for this conversation about someone that is quite dynamic and who we are eager to learn more about. And so let me start us off with the context, because your class will explore the multitude of Fernando Pessoa, who is a phenomenon as I've dug into this. But before jumping into his multiplicity of heteronyms and distinctive authorship, I'd like to set the table with a bit on the person. So who is Fernando Pessoa, and when and where was he born? What was his childhood like? Tell us about the person before he becomes this prolific author.
Thank you very much, Seth, and thank you for doing these conversations. It's like having our own TV show, Graham TV show about courses. Thank you. So I'm excited to be back to Fernando Pessoa. I taught the course, I believe, in 2012, and since then, lots of new books have been published, not only on Pessoa, but by Pessoa, and it will become clear why now. Because he was born in Lisbon in 1888 and died in Lisbon in 1935, before the Civil War in Spain, before fascism really took over Europe. His name, Pessoa, really means person, and he has lived up to this name, multiplying the persons that already existed in him. It's difficult to talk about him as somebody who became what we know him to be now, because it's very likely that he always was like this since his childhood. He comes from an interesting background. His paternal line goes, what we know about it, goes back to the 17th century. He is of Jewish descent on his father's side. Of course, like many other Portuguese Jews, they all converted to Catholicism, but these were precisely the ones persecuted. And the first time Pessoa as a name appears is in the 17th century in one of his ancestors, Sancho Pessoa da Cunha, who adopted this name. So it's an old name, but a rare name as well. So two of his ancestors arrested by the Inquisition in the 17th and 18th century His father was a man without ambitions in his profession, which was accounting, although had a stable position in the Ministry of Justice, but was also a theater critic and a music critic. So his real life started in the evening when he was not at work any longer. His mother, Maria Maddalena, was also extremely educated, pianist, wrote poetry. There are lots of playful people in the family. There is a grandmother who was diagnosed with intermittent dementia, but she was perceived as mad, of course, by young Fernando. So that's very briefly about his background, and there were several events in his life that seem to have triggered this prolific creation of other personalities. And one of them is losing his father at the age of 5 to tuberculosis. Also, about 7 months later, his younger brother died at the age of 1 year old. So the encounter with death, loss, and it's very easy to talk about Pessoa, the lonely child, starting to invent virtual friends. One of the first friends he invented, Chevalier de Pas, French name, was writing letters to him. And until several years ago, we thought it all came from loneliness, that he was really a lonely child, an artistic type with great imagination, learned to read and write very early at the age of 4. So that has happened to other children. But recently, the biographer of Fernando Pessoa discovered some letters and figured out that, in fact, there is one person, his great maternal uncle, who has played a great role in Fernando's artistic development. That was Uncle da Cunha. And Fernando spent lots of time with this couple, da Cunha and Manuel da Cunha and his wife, Maria. And what they did was they played with the uncle, inventing those personalities. So it's not like everything originally was happening in the head of young Fernando. It was a game. And it was not just one, it was several. And then there were all kinds of imagined other games. Fernando as a politician. What would be Fernando as a politician? So they really, an adult and a very young child played together and created worlds. So to Fernando, this was a normal mode of existence. It's not that he didn't play with his peers, but with adults, he really felt like he could be serious about creating personalities. After the death of his father, one traumatic event that happened was that his mother married very quickly, within a year, married to the ship captain who was sent to Durban, then capital of the British colony of Natal. His name was Joel Rosa, and she had very quickly 5 children with him. Unfortunately, 2 of them died, 2 girls died. But the family expanded in Fernando, and Fernando didn't feel he was this unique mommy's preferred child because there were others. Durban is very important in several respects. First of all, English, education in English. And he excelled so much that he got all possible awards, and he skipped 2 years, graduated at 13, and was already attending a commercial school. That was what was available. So he has been in Durban from 1896 until 1905, with a pause in 1901 when the family returned to Lisbon, and he stayed to take the exams for the Portuguese school. And so the English education, hence he originally thought he would be an English writer, English language writer. That was his idea about writing English. But he also witnessed the Anglo-Boer War. His path almost crossed with Mahatma Gandhi and Winston Churchill, who were there in Durban during that time. Mahatma Gandhi was a lawyer and represented the rights of the Indian minority, which was actually huge. It was 1/4 of Durban were Indians, Indian workers. And Churchill was participated in the Anglo-Boer War, and Anglo-Boer War, was taken captive, escaped somehow, and gave this big speech. So it's interesting to know, no matter how young he was, these things were happening. He was reading newspapers. So this is a part of his firsthand experience of Portuguese colonialism that, I have to say, of course, was from the perspective of the ruling class, right? Although he wasn't English, he was white, and he went to English school, but that's important. So I'll stop here because it already becomes too much, I guess.
Well, you see, though, this character who is experiencing so many life experiences in one life, and almost sounds a little bit like a early 20th century. I'm thinking of a Forrest Gump-like character that just is in all these places where all of these major, global events are taking place. And he's also going through these different traumas that, on top of his creativity, are maybe leading to different characters that he's playing over the course of his life. And so, it's a good segue, Katia, because, I want to now move into Pessoa, the author. And much of his writing comes through heteronyms. And I'm wondering if you could just kind of talk a little bit about what are heteronyms, and then how does he use them to be a multiplicity of people, at least on paper.
Just before that, one sentence about the political multiplicity he witnessed. He was born into a monarchy that was falling apart, became a Republican himself as a 17-year-old. The Republic was very unstable. The fourth president was assassinated. Portugal participated in World War I, not very successfully, joining in 1916. And then towards the end of his life, he witnessed the fascist dictatorship of Salazar, the beginning of it. Wow. So all this compressed within 20 years of his life.
Yeah, and no less the founding 20 years, the ones that, mold you most of all.
Yeah. I mean, the multiplicity surrounded him. So he had to have opinions, right? He had to maybe try to side with this group or the other group to figure it out philosophically, politically. And heteronym, the word is not coined by him, but is used for his own purposes. He has created lots of creative personalities, okay? They all write. They exist in writing. They write to each other. They write in different genres: poetry, prose, philosophy, drama, literary criticism. He calls them heteronyms to distinguish from pseudonyms, because on the surface, it looks like, okay, he's writing under many names, but it's more than that, because heteronym in Greek means different name. Pseudonym means false name. So these are not false names. These are whole personages that he creates with whom he says he disagrees oftentimes. This is not how he thinks. He doesn't think like, say, Ricardo Reis, who is a monarchist. I mentioned already the invention of Chevalier de Pas, but depending on how you count those heteronyms, I think there are about 17 that are really important, but some have counted 100, okay? And he had plans for all of them. The biographer of Pessoa, Richard Zenit, and translator of quite a few of his works, has listed 47 that are prominent enough to be listed. So what this allows him is to experiment, to go in this direction, in that direction, a third direction. But unlike other writers who have periods in their artistic development, they explore something, then they go to something else. He did everything in a synchronized manner. They all existed simultaneously, and it was a dialogical space in which creativity blossomed, because when you have several opinions to consider, well, that might lead to something new.
Well, that is a fascinating amount of generativity. I mean, in the sense of, almost 100 potentially out there, and 17 that are fully fleshed out in a, person who lives less than 50 years. It's quite remarkable. I want to now dive into some of those heteronyms and their actual work products. And, one of the greatest products of his is the Book of Disquiet. A book that's published posthumously and is written under the heteronym Bernardo Suarez. And so I'm curious if you could tell us about Bernardo and about the book.
Okay, so it's a misnomer to talk about the book. There are many books. Yeah. I have 4 versions of the Book of Disquiet myself here on my desk. The most recent one, it clearly distinguishes between 2 periods, even under 2 different heteronyms. The first one is Vicente Guedes, and the second one is Bernardo Suarez. Bookkeepers, this is their profession. Many writers divide humankind into 2 categories, heroes and poets. Heroes are those who act, and poets are those who observe. So these 2 were observers, as are almost all of Fernando Pessoa's heteronyms. So Bernardo Suarez is a bookkeeper who observes Lisbon and records his reflections. What Pessoa intended to do was to put it together one day under the title Book of Disquiet, but he never did because he died. Yeah. So different editors are putting it together in a different way. And it's interesting maybe to follow chronology as much as we can do it. And one interesting comment coming from Pessoa here is that Bernardo Suarez is not exactly a heteronym, but semi-heteronym, because his way of expression is very close to Fernando Pessoa's himself. And he makes the comment that in prose, it's harder to other oneself. It's easier in poetry. So if we want to see the real Pessoa, maybe to some extent, at least as a style, this is Bernardo Suarez.
Well, and so let's talk about what's in the book itself. And what would you share? Is there a passage in there that you feel reflects the distinctive writing? And yeah, and I'll invite you to share it with us if you're willing.
Yeah, sure. I even looked up several appropriate quotes here. I think what distinguishes the book is a characteristically Portuguese concept, the concept of saudade. There is no word in English, but this is some kind of yearning, a nostalgia type. It's sweet, bitter. That's the tone of Bernardo Suarez's writing. I just did the search, and it's commented on 80 times within the book for a reason. So I'm going to read several fragments, and the book has this character of fragments, but actually put together, they create a unity not only of tone, but also a philosophy, a way of seeing the world. And if somebody has Margaret Schul Costa's translation, this is on page 7 in the very beginning. I'm going to read now. My soul is a hidden orchestra. I do not know what instruments, what violins and harps, drums and tambours sound and clash inside me. I know myself only as a symphony. I know myself only as a symphony. I think this is how we all know ourselves, right? We know how we are without analyzing what causes us to be that way. Another quote, to create within myself a state with its own politics, its own political parties and revolutions, to be all those things myself, to be God in the royal pantheism of that I, the people, the essence and action of their bodies, their souls, the ground they walk on and the things they do, to be everything, to be both them and not them. Ah, that's one dream I have not yet achieved. If I did, I might perhaps die. I don't know why, but one shouldn't be able to live after committing such a sacrilege, such a usurpation of the divine power to be everything. And another one, living is like crocheting patterns to someone else's design, but while one works, one's thoughts are free, and as the ivory hook dives in and out amongst the wool, all the enchanted princes that ever existed are free to stroll through their parks. The crochet of things, a pause, nothing. This is written in 29. And now I can read more, but this should give you some sense of the tone of the inner world of the observer. He observes people and events as well, but he never leaves Lisbon, really. Goes only to the vicinity. Neither does Pessoa.
Well, so I want to go deeper on the prose, but I'm aware of time and I want to get to questions. So I'm going to move us to poetry, and then we'll come to questions and go deeper in both. And so Pessoa also writes poetry under many heteronyms. And I know that in your upcoming course, you're going to look at a number of poetic works, and I'm curious if you might be willing to share a little bit about that poetry as well.
Yeah, definitely. And so first of all, I want to say, I know many of our students and people overall feel uncomfortable with poetry because, oh, you have to interpret it. It's so complicated. It's not for me, my English teacher, and so on and so forth. I want to say that the major heteronym that Fernando Pessoa created is the ultimate poet, in the sense that he talks about the things the way they are. He points to the fact that that's it, that's the poetry, to notice how things really are. And I'm going to just read a couple of excerpts, and some are, and this is a whole poem. For instance, whenever I look at things and think about what people think of them, I laugh like a brook cleanly splashing against a rock. For the only hidden meaning of things is that they have no hidden meaning. So that's a philosophy, right? It's more than an observation. And another one, they spoke to me of people and of humanity, but I've never seen people or humanity. I've seen various people astonishingly dissimilar, each separated from the next by an unpeopled space. And one I really love about nature, he has interesting observations of nature. Nature is parts without the whole. This definition has been quoted many times. And there is, of course, a whole development that leads him to this, but that's the major heteronym that the other heteronyms adopt as a master. So Fernando Pessoa creates his own master, and then he personally and several of his heteronyms start following this master. They learn from the master. The interesting part is, at least this is what he says in 1935, when he doesn't know, but he will die soon, is that this heteronym was created in 1914, and in a moment of inspiration, it's called the Triumphant Day. This is what he calls it. He sits down and writes 30-some poems in a row, basically more than half of the book that is attributed to Alberto Cairo. And then what happens? That's the interesting part. Then he writes several poems as himself immediately. Some kind of feedback is happening between the two. And that's particularly interesting for anyone who wants to, who is interested in studying human creativity and its dialogical character. And I can read other heteronyms. They're funny. I'll read just two stanzas of a poem that's translated probably 30 times, and that's written by Fernando Pessoa himself, not by heteronym. And it's called Autopsychography. This is the translation of Richard Zenit. The poet is a faker who's so good at his act, he even fakes the pain of pain he feels in fact. And those who read his words will feel in what he wrote neither of the pains he has, but just the one they don't. It continues a little bit. But then the date is the 1st of April, 1931, and you wonder, what does it mean? Is it a joke? How much of a joke? So whether people are interested in the course or not, I recommend reading some Pessoa. You'll enjoy it.
Well, so I want to come to questions, so please get yours ready. This is my last one before we come to all of you. You can chat them in or just use the function on the bottom right, reactions, to raise your hand. The final question, Katia, that I want to ask before turning it over is about Pessoa's legacy, because not only is there this treasure trove of prolific works, apparently some of them all crafted in just a day of sitting and writing, there's also the influence he has on many others, including Jose Saramago. And I'm curious if you could just speak to the influence he has on Saramago and kind of the broader legacy that is being discovered of his work on, Portuguese authors more generally, and global authors.
I think worldwide, Pessoa is the poet's poet. There is no poet that has not read Fernando Pessoa. But with Saramago, the case is very interesting because there is no imitation. There is, in fact, a strong opposition of sorts, because I have included this book by José Saramago, the year of the death of Ricardo Reis, for a reason. Ricardo Reis is one of the heteronyms, and he happens to be a monarchist, a very conservative person who lives after the death of Fernando Pessoa, when fascism is really taking over. There is political police, there is censorship, there are so many things going on, and you can't just sit and write. You have to do something. So I wanted us to explore a reaction to Fernando Pessoa from the perspective of a doer, right? Because
Right.
when you imagine worlds, they might or might not affect the real world around you. But what Saramago studies is, okay, what if one of these heteronyms was to face the political world? And Fernando himself lives about as a ghost about 9 months after his death too. So that's one way to tackle Pessoa, to converse with him, to respond to him.
Well, so I'm looking out at our wonderful audience, seeing if there are questions. You can feel free, if you have them, to unmute directly, to chat in, or to post them as a reaction. But until you do, I will ask another question, which is, as you look forward to teaching this course, Katia, there's an immense amount to cover because this is such a prolific person and because there's such complexity. You have to learn the heteronym and then the piece of work. How will you approach teaching the class?
So I just wanted to mention that this is the first class of a peculiar sequence I have planned for next year, which I'll talk about the sequence on Friday in my first Friday lecture. But I want to study multiplicity psychologically and sociologically. And as a starting point, I've chosen 3 writers. This is Fernando Pessoa, Kierkegaard, very similar with his pseudonyms with whom he disagreed, and finally Jorge Luis Borges. For this course, of course, we'll be reading selections of even of Book of Disquiet. We will be reading selections and poetry. Every week we'll be reading both a little bit. The reading will be about 20-some pages of poetry and about 40, 50 pages of prose. If people have specific, and I can send you the syllabus.
Great, and I've just put in the chat the upcoming First Friday lecture this Friday that we're all very excited about, which will look at all 3 authors. Rick, I see you have a question. If you want to come off mute, you can ask it directly.
Okay, yes. Something you said at the beginning, I might get this backwards to show, just flip it around. But you said that he thought it was easier to write in multiple personalities in poetry than it is in prose. Is there a particular reason he thinks that way, or do you agree, or why is that?
Literally, he says it's easier to other yourself in poetry than in prose. I tend to agree with him. Because poetry, because of its succinctness, allows for more distinct styles, I guess. When you have to describe something, you need to adhere to syntax in a particular way. Rhythmically, for instance, his poet heteronyms write very differently. One is influenced by Whitman and writes free verse. Another writes Horatian odes. One rhymes, and the others write free verse. So with prose, because he doesn't write novels really per se, he has written drama too. I think there is a reason he has difficulties othering himself in prose, but this is something to be explored.
Douglas McDonald, do you have our next question?
Should I ask people?
Yes, Douglas, do you want to ask your question?
Yes.
Perfect.
You mentioned that the ultimate poet treats how things really are and treats nature that way. Could you talk a little more about Pessoa's relationship to the real world, to nature?
I think he really experienced nature in Africa, not in Lisbon. In Lisbon, he was a man of the city. And in Africa, the first place where the family lived was in a neighborhood that showed him how nature could be really powerful, tropical flora everywhere, different animals. With Alberto Cairo and his relationship with nature, I think it's a little bit a matter of philosophical, how to put it, trick to talk about nature when he talks about the material world. A tree is a tree is a tree, okay? But what kind of tree is it? He's not interested. So he doesn't perceive nature the way a gardener would perceive it. There are poems about gardening that Doug might be referring to them that are very interesting, but it's a more philosophical approach. We human beings, human consciousness versus material world.
Karen, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. A number of things you were saying caught my ear, and I'm trying to put them together to understand how Pessoa thought about the structure of the self. And so I'll explain what I heard and how I'm trying to put them together. At one point, you were saying that he understood himself as a synchrony. And then at another point, you said that there is one heteronym that you identified as being most like his voice. But I'm wondering if he is a combination. Like, how can we say, for instance, that one particular character is like him, but also, like, is there any particular him to be like?
Yeah, that's a great question, Karen. Thank you very much. Well, he has also said that he doesn't exist. Okay, he himself doesn't exist. What exists is this group of people. And while one is leading as a poetry heteronym, Alberto Cairo, he's not leading as a personality. His poetry is influential for the other poets. I think if we accept the concept of the fluid self, if we don't expect the self to be stable, and if we stop fooling ourselves that the self is stable, we will understand him better. But he also believed that he was a little bit mad, a little bit a genius. He talks of his writing as a result of constant tendency for dissolution and simulation. He thinks of his grandmother as a source of genetic predisposition to madness, but he doesn't see himself as mad, although one of his English writing heteronyms, Alexander Serge, is obsessed that he will get mad any moment. So I think what's peculiar about it, unlike Kierkegaard, he doesn't try to order this world. It's not hierarchical. It's democracy. It's a republic. It's a mess, but it's a creative mess. I don't know if it answers it. A lot has been written, and I have written an article about it that I can send you if you write to me. My email is kmitova@uchicago.edu.
I think all of us may be interested in that article, Katia. So we'll see if you're open to us following up with it among your many prolific articles as an author yourself. I saw, William, your hand up. Let me know if you still want to ask your question. You can just re-raise it. But right now I'm going to go to Mary's question in the chat. How does Pessoa's writing via heteronyms differ from other authors writing in the first person, but as different narrators rather than as themselves? So yeah, can you talk a little bit about how this use of heteronyms, because obviously there are authors that have this approach of taking on many identities or writing in many different genres, but how is kind of his writing via heteronyms different than what we may see more traditionally among authors?
Yeah, that's a terrific question too. And in fact, Pessoa is not that unique. It just, with him, it's on the surface, but any writer, especially prose writer or dramatist who creates characters, has to step into these characters to inhabit them. It's, in a sense, Pessoa's oeuvre exemplifies writerly creativity and takes it to some extreme. So he doesn't differ that much. I mean, he doesn't differ that much from Shakespeare, from Whitman, from, if you wish, Philip Roth with his semi-heteronyms of sorts. So Plato, the Platonic dialogues, there is no one Platonism. I mean, just it's everywhere where is creativity, there is an exploration of other possibilities, right? So yeah, it doesn't differ that much. It's just all brought to the surface. And because of that, it allows us to study the mechanism of the creative process.
Christine Sam writes, I came to Pessoa from psychology. I'm a trauma therapist, and Pessoa provides a very helpful schema understanding dissociation. Will you be exploring this in the class?
Yes, definitely. And by the way, once upon a time, there was a term multiple personality disorder, which was changed later into dissociative, and the stigma was removed, but I call what he had multiple personality order.
Right.
And for a good reason, because he does it with awareness, not necessarily with full control, but with full awareness of the interaction. It's an interactive space that he creates in his head and on paper.
We have a question from Jerry. If one of these heteronyms is for facing the political world, what would we need in order to recognize that one? Which one would you choose?
I think I think probably Álvaro de Campos more than the others, and some of the prose writers. And Álvaro de Campos was very prolific. He wrote very long poems, very Whitman-esque poems.
Well, so I know we are at time, Katia, and I just want to say a huge thank you. I have been fascinated by the courses you've taught at Graham since I joined a few years ago, and each quarter I look up to just new creative ways of looking at literature and the world, and we're incredibly grateful that you teach at Graham and that you teach so expansively and so brilliantly. So thank you for being part of our universe. And I know there are many people here looking forward to either the in-person or the online opportunity to take this class on what is truly a phenomenon of an author or authors, depending on how we define it. Any final words before we leave?
Well, I'll say I continue to be fascinated with Pessoa because he allows me to study myself always. When I try to reject something that doesn't make sense to me, I'm thinking, okay, it doesn't make sense to me now, but it might make sense to me tomorrow. So it gives me freedom. So hopefully other people's experience would be similar.
Well, that is the beautiful part of writing and reading, is the freedom that you sometimes occupy by being able to peek into others' lived experiences and see other worlds while still staying in your seat. So thank you. And thank you all for joining us and for the outstanding questions. And I'm personally looking forward to Friday, where I'll hear you go deeper into not just Pessoa, but two other authors that follow in this world of multiplicity. So to be continued for all of us at the Graham School. Have good afternoons, everyone.
Thank you very much for spending some time with the group, the Pessoa group, Pessoa and Company.
Bye.